James, it's so wonderful that you could join us again. At the end of the last conversation, there was so much more to be explored, and so thank you for coming back and doing this part two. Um, Many of the things that you explored, that you shared through that wonderful glimpse into your journey, and a profound glimpse it was and is, um, really resonate with us in many, many ways, because both Jane and I, through our own experiences, believe that the way the current system is structured, it's upside down, and it serves to be incredibly judgmental at its very foundation. And um, rather than focusing and embracing the belief that the seeds of brilliance lie within everybody, rather it's structured to say these these sets of intelligences are important, and down at the bottom of the table, these sets aren't. And if you're good at language and math, you're a smart person, and if you're not, you're not. But there are whole other realms of complexities around that. So I'm going to ask you a question. If somebody gave you a magic wand and said to you, you have a blank slate in front of you, we are giving you the authority to reimagine how learning systems and how learning cultures should be in order to bring out the brilliance that lies within everybody. What would be one or two of your foundational, unshakable characteristics of that learning system, of that culture?
I would say the first one would be to change the dynamic between student and teacher. I know a weird thing I've found, at least coming to Odyssey, but also now having experiences with college professors, talking to them, having discussions. The structure we're usually taught as children is that there is one source of all knowledge, which is the teacher, and there's the listener or the person who absorbs all that knowledge, is the student. And even that goes along with calling them Mr., Mrs. You never call them by their first name or his last name. There's an inherent structure and distinction between student and teacher. I know at Odyssey, I've gone out to coffee with one of my teachers, Dr. Kruk, and just talked about the things I wanted to go into, whether it was research about pedagogy within the Bible or an independent study. And so that dynamic change is very important to me, especially with me being able to go into spoken word. I would not have taken that suggestion as seriously if Mr. Beckett hadn't already built a relationship with me during that class. Because it is that awkward thing of, am I moving to impress you, or am I moving with you to figure out what I want to do in life? Like, there's a difference in dynamic and how that relationship works. The second thing I would pick would be one, creative freedom, but also just recognizing that people learn differently. And I think I said this before, I don't remember, but I was in online school for 7 years. And while I was able to learn a lot and explore different things in that structure, it wasn't until I got to Odyssey and had the ability to learn visually and really just connect with what I was doing that I was able to absorb the information I was getting. I do not do well in an online setting when it comes to just reading and having to then incorporate that somehow into a project, which is what we do at the end of every term. And so I would say, yeah, those two things: change the relationship between student and teacher and make it more accessible, or make freedom of learning styles more accessible in that structure.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Jane, do you have anything to build on from there?
No. One thing I noticed about you though, James, is that you, for a high school student, not just for a high school student, I mean, even a person, you're very socially and emotionally aware.
Mm.
Like, I don't think when I was back in high school in your grade, I didn't like going to high school either. You know, a few people do, but I never would have been able to articulate it the way you just did. And if someone had asked me what could I change about school, I wouldn't have been able to express it so well. So you're obviously like very smart. And so I'm wondering, you know, people who maybe have less ability to express themselves in that way, how I could see them like really struggling, continue to struggle. Like how would you suggest that kids like that who are not able to articulate things as well or express themselves as well, how do we draw them out and, you know, get them to participate? And, you know, because some kids I know are really turned off school, and how do we get them from that sort of dark place back out into the light? Any ideas?
And so I was also in that space. And you say I'm smart, but I'm also surrounded by a ton of smart peers. So in comparison, I don't see it that way necessarily. But even with that situation, there is a certain pressure that comes with being surrounded by people who you believe you are smarter than you, or have this inherent higher value in the classroom, or what have you, whatever that situation is. Make the classroom fun. I mean, make conversations a natural thing. I know with some of my friends, right now I'm in a pre-calculus and trigonometry class. And just specifically the person I'm talking about is a she. Her being able to just walk away from the class setting, have a one-on-one with the teacher, where you're not, even if you aren't being judged, you don't feel like you're being judged. And just having that conversation, making it a comfortable place, a place where you're able to be vulnerable, is how I ended up rekindling that love for learning. In my first class, which was with Mr. Beckett, they were talking about concepts I didn't understand and know about. There was this big pressure on my chest to, at the end of this, I'm gonna have to write a 10-page essay. What do you? I've never written a paper before. You want me to write a 10-page essay? But it was the welcoming environment. I think my first 5 classes, I never really spoke up in class. The teacher always came to me to begin with, and we would just have a one-on-one conversation. It was no judgment. Eyes weren't peering on me. I wasn't stopping the flow of class. So I guess, long story short, if a teacher cares about you and makes you more comfortable, you will be able to express yourself more.
So maybe we put too much pressure on some students in the classroom, to achieve and get the marks and speak up in class and perform, basically.
Yeah, I would, and this is something I found at I'd say every level. The highest level I've been to in a college class, that's not like, but there is like this push that if you don't understand something, to speak up in class, and that's just not something, I'm still not comfortable with doing that necessarily. I am more of an observer. If I really want to speak about something in class, I will, but 9 times out of 10, I'm just come to you directly. Because it's, even if they say, oh, there's no stupid questions, you're not stopping the flow of the class, there's other people who you may be speaking up for, it's still a pressure that's put on you. So it's a lot easier to have a one-on-one conversation about whatever you're curious about.
Amazing.
That continues on in the workplace, by the way. No one wants to stop the flow and ask a question in the middle of a meeting either.
James, when I was speaking to Scott last March, we've spoken since last March, but in the conversation last March, we were talking about how he and the staff adjusted to learning through COVID. And they they steered away from the temptation of just going to a very linear online learning model and embraced the concept that what we need more now is hope, projects of hope. Do you have a story about the project that you took on? I have no idea if you do or not.
So I believe, so it was after we got back to New Orleans, we entered the second term. And I want to say we mixed in all subjects within a
Yes.
single course.
Yes.
And hope was a part of the name, but I don't remember what the name of the course was. It was Hope in Troubled Times. That's what the name of the course was.
Okay.
And so we did math. You had a selection, multiple selections of each subject. So I think there was a single math class, but there was, I think, 2 different options for sciences, 3 different ones for literature and English. So every day you had a different selection that you could pick, a different class you could jump into. And at first, I treated it like my old online school. And so it was like, okay, this isn't going to be a fun experience. Which the main thing that got me through it was how engaging the teachers were. And I had a couple conversations with Dr. Kruk and how they formulated their lessons while it was going on to help me get a better understanding of how this flow would work and how to change my mindset about how it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess if I had to pick a story in terms of what I did, every class you had this project either at the end of the week or the homework of that day, I don't remember. And so it would be creative, whatever you wanted to do. If you wanted to make a song about something that you learned about during Lincoln's War, then you do that. We had a poetry class where we went over Sojourner Truth. If you wanted to make a song, make a prose poem, an essay about what you felt about her story, do that. You always had those options and creative outlets to bridge academia and fun.
Mm-hmm.
Though those 2 don't necessarily have to be separate in this setting, it kind of felt like it was.
Yeah.
And so my final project, I did, I believe, my first poetry book or poetry collection. A couple pieces from that was from the Sojourner Truth piece. Another one was from a poetry class, kind of looking over Claude McKay, people from the Harlem Renaissance era. And so that's what my collective poetry piece was to do with some of the pieces from the class, as well as I believe that was the start of the BLM, the protests, murders.
Yes.
Kind of that conflict back and forth. And so some of the poetry had to do with that. A lot of the classes had a reflection that they wanted you to turn in after each lesson, just to, as an outlet, if you didn't feel comfortable talking to them, or if you didn't have necessarily someone at home to talk to, you could just submit it. Write your thoughts out, at least get them out on paper so they're not bundled up inside of you. Okay. There was a lot of different outlets that you had to express yourself and not get caught up within quarantine type situation.
Wonderful. Jane, anything before
you mentioned a second ago that you were a bit surprised how engaging your teachers were. What did they do that was engaging when they were teaching a lesson or whatever?
It was mainly how they reached out. And so we didn't have class times. The platform is very simple, and this is the reason why I freaked out in the beginning. It was Google Classroom. They had the lessons laid out. They made videos and kind of introduced whatever they wanted to introduce. They put, I think Miss Bybee would put like YouTube videos and TV shows, to whatever related to the concept that we were working on. And that made it fun, but the thing that helped me out the most is just being able to reach out and talk to them about it. And usually after we had gotten over what I originally set up the meeting for, we would just rabbit hole into life. And it felt like I was still at school, because they were also struggling with being in quarantine from a teacher's perspective. So the engaging part was the ability to reach out and not being scared to reach out. But also they did make it fun. They tried to make it fun in the online setting, having videos, putting jokes, memes, clips.
Yeah, yeah,
But the part that helped me was being able to engage and reach out and just talk.
yeah.
James?
Yeah, humor seems to help for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Just now going back to the first question that I posed, and you answered it within the framework of schooling. But I'm curious to know, this has been a bizarrely complex age of complexity, not just in the US, but it seems it was infected around the world. You see similar themes in the UK and Germany and many other countries. This complexity and these odd things that have been happening, with extremist views. As a young person, let's say somebody made you the authority of the world for a couple of days.
That'd be fun.
It would be fun. It would be a lot of fun. What are some of the things that you think? Because what has impressed me, never mind what's impressed me, what I notice about you is your answers are so simple. We shouldn't even have to be talking about this stuff, right? It just should be happening in schools. Relationship with teachers, with staff, the connection to community. I have no idea why it's not just natural, but it's not. So what would be some of the things that you think we could do practically to bring some decency back?
That is a hard question. And I've had this conversations a couple of times with my grandparents, to kind of bridge off of their experience and try to understand, because I also understand I'm very ignorant about the world. There's a lot of things I don't know or simply don't have enough experience to be at the level to explain. One of the conversations I had, and it was specifically a question I had, was why are a lot of the views people have, whether you view it as right or wrong, so streamlined, so straightforward, not straightforward, but seemingly narrow-minded in a way. Like it's one direction. You can't, you have to be one way or the other. And so I don't know if you can necessarily place rules around that. And I'm not sure if I can answer that question per se, because that's a very hard topic to go over.
Yes.
One of the simplest ways, and this would have to be further explored or explained, would just be having a conversation.
Oh, yeah.
I found in the situation, or at the beginning of the BLM in America or in the United States, with kind of the extremist views on both sides and just the inherent arguments that happen there, I reached out to a couple people. One of the people I reached out to was a person who went to my old school ethics. And then it was in response to something she posted, because social media obviously is very prevalent, especially during that time. And I reached out to her about something she posted, and we ended up having a conversation. I think her post was some, like, it was a Bible quote, going over, like, just because something happens to you doesn't mean you should act out in violence or something of that nature. It was a response to a riot that happened. And so I was asking kind of what her thoughts on that were. She brought up compassion, things of that nature. And I understood those as well. I don't know if you're religious or anything of that nature. I'm Baptist. I do believe in God and Jesus. And so I was having kind of that back and forth with her. And one thing I learned through that situation was because of her worldview, we didn't have the same footing as far as what our inherent opinions of the situation would be. I do think her worldview was quite progressive. Her mom was a pastor, which I know a couple of years ago wouldn't have even been a thought. However, her church, or at least the way she viewed church, was a way to prepare children for the world, how to encounter the world, how to live in the world, how to bring compassion and joy to the world.
Yeah.
However, the worldview that their specific congregation never really focused on was the one that impacts me. And so her opinion on the situation, what she saw as primarily riots, she viewed it as bad, as something that shouldn't have been happening in the first place, or as overreaction. And if I would have let my initial response to what she said come out, that conversation would have ended there.
Yeah.
And it would have just been a misunderstanding in the first place. So we eventually reached somewhat of a agree to disagree, but also an understanding at the very least. So that's kind of how that situation panned out.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Jane.
Actually, yeah. So we have this chapter we've included actually. We have gone back and forth. Do we include this? Do we not include this? We've actually called it the uncomfortable chapter, which because we think it might be uncomfortable for some people to read, but it says pretty much exactly what you summed up.
Yeah.
That there seems to be just two sides that are battling together. And so within this chapter, we said, since we published The Wonder Wall, our world is increasing in complexity. 2017 was only 4 years ago now. But the world has changed so much, even in just that time, and it's become so much more complex. So we sort of laid out these kind of 10 principles that we're seeing going around, as people try to grapple with this complexity and the stuff that's going on, and just how, sometimes things just seem to be so hateful, and people aren't talking and they're not able to come to terms, and they're just, as you say, unfriending each other, untexting each other, blocking each other, instead of talking, and having these conversations. So I'm really impressed that you and your friend at least were able to come to some, maybe it's not a strong agreement or disagree to agree or agree to disagree, but at least you were talking, which I think this chapter is directed towards adults, and it's saying, if we want children to be able to deal with the turmoil that's going on in the world and be resilient and stuff like that, it has to start with you, the teachers and the adults and the parents. Like we have to start being more grown up ourselves and set a good example about, okay, you've got a conflict, because we're going to have more and more and more conflicts in the world. Here's ways to settle it. Here's ways to, see the other person's point of view. Here's how to come to a better solution and work together. And that's really what we need innovation for. That's what innovation is finding these solutions. So it's really interesting what you just said, because it really ties into this chapter. So I think we will include it, and we've been kind of scared too.
Absolutely.
But you're giving us some encouragement for that, sure.
Well, not only encouragement, James, you're certainly giving us that, but you're giving us some real inspiration. It's funny, I've been asked to partake in a podcast tomorrow on it's on, what do you call it, Gen X and Millennium and the differences in generations. And I had a conversation this afternoon, and I said to the person who was asking me, I said, I find that whole topic offensive. And she said, I know you do. That's why we're asking you. For me, there's too much focus, and I know for Jane too, on almost any topic you bring up these days. There's focus on the differences between people, between black people, white people, yellow people, different denominations, different belief systems, different age groups, for goodness sake. And when I hear people talk about saying, well, this group of youngsters, the millennials or the Gen Xers, have these characteristics, it baffles me because I just don't see it. I absolutely, look at this. You know, I'm an older person. Jane is nearly as old as me.
He's the oldest.
You're young. But what I see is just fascinating sharing and connection. So all that to say, you've inspired us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time.